You hear about military genius, brilliant commanders, tactical masterminds who turned impossible odds into legendary victories. But nobody talks about the month when one general trapped 80,000 enemies on a hill and then surrounded them with walls, while another 250,000 showed up to save them. September 52, before the Common Era, Eastern Gaul, a plateau called Alesia. Julius Caesar has 60,000 troops. Vercingetorix commands 80,000 warriors locked inside the fortress. Another 250,000 are marching to break the siege. The math doesn't work. Caesar should retreat. Instead, he builds 2 walls, one facing in, one facing out, and fights both armies at once. Caesar marching through modern France, conquering tribe after tribe, using divide and rule like a scalpel. He played chiefs against each other, handed out Roman wine and gold to favorites, turned neighbors into enemies. The Helvetii went down first near Bebracht, then Germanic tribes across the Rhine, then the Belgi in the north. Caesar's 12 legions carved through Gaul systematically, burning Oppida, taking hostages, selling populations into slavery. By 53, he announced Gaul was now a Roman province, Roman laws, Roman religion. That was the line. The Druids met every year in the sacred center of Gaul, lands the Carnutes protected. Now Rome threatened to destroy it. The tribes finally understood they had to unite or die separately. Ver over Cingeto warrior Ric's king, born between 82 and 74, somewhere in the Auvergne. His father Celtillus had tried to become king of all Gaul, and his own people executed him for it. Vercingetorix grew up knowing that unification attempt cost his father's life. When he tried to rally the Arverni nobles to revolt, they expelled him. His uncle Gobanitio and the aristocracy thought opposing Caesar meant death. Vercingetorix didn't quit. He went to the poor, the landless warriors, the people who suffered under Roman occupation while traders got rich. He took Gergovia by force and suddenly had an army. He demanded hostages from each tribe to ensure loyalty. Minor crimes got an ear cut off or an eye gouged. Serious offenses meant death by fire. Roman discipline applied to Gallic warriors. The Senones joined the Parisii, Pictones, Cadurci, Turones, Alerci, Lemovices, tribes along the Atlantic coast. Then the Bituriges. The Aedui, Rome's longtime allies, flipped to the rebellion. Caesar was in Cisalpine Gaul when word reached him. Winter snows 6 feet deep blocked the passes. He dug through them anyway. Plutarch recorded that the speed and audacity of Caesar's march in those conditions told the Gauls an unconquered army was bearing down on them. The Bituriges begged to spare their capital near modern Bourges. Vercingetorix agreed against his instincts. Caesar besieged it during a rainstorm. Roman siege towers moved into position while defenders took shelter. Artillery broke holes in the walls. The legions poured through. Caesar claimed 40,000 dead. No prisoners. Total slaughter. The Gallic coalition held together. That alone proved Vercingetorix's leadership. The Arvernian capital on a steep hill. Caesar tried to take it and got repulsed. His legions took casualties. He retreated south toward Provincia Romana with 10 legions and summoned 10,000 Germanic auxiliaries. Total force, roughly 60,000 soldiers. Meanwhile, Gallic chiefs met at Bebracht on Mount Bouvray and elected Vercingetorix supreme commander of united Gallic forces. He sent cavalry to attack Caesar's column. The Romans with their German allies routed them completely. Vercingetorix pulled back with 80,000 infantry and 12,000 cavalry to Alesia, a fortress town of the Mandubi tribe atop Mont Auxois above what's now Alisy-Saint-Reine in Burgundy. The Gauls had built a stone wall around the settlement reinforced with timber, Murus Gallicus construction. Horizontal wooden beams held together with iron nails running through the stonework. Cross-bracing made it flexible enough to absorb impact from siege engines. It could bend without breaking, faster to build than Roman masonry. Vercingetorix had provisions for 30 days. He intended to trap Caesar, let the Romans besiege the fortress while Gallic relief forces assembled, then crush them between hammer and anvil. He sent all his cavalry out under cover of night before Caesar closed the ring. 15,000 horsemen rode to every allied tribe, with orders to raise the largest army Gaul had ever seen. He had the numbers to build fortifications, and if he could seal Vercingetorix inside before starvation broke the defenders, the relief army would arrive too late. September 52. Caesar ordered his legions to construct a circumvallation, an inner ring of fortifications facing the Oppidum. Keep the Gauls in. The measurements are documented in Caesar's Commentari de Bello Gallico and confirmed by Napoleon III's archaeological excavations in the 1860s and modern surveys using aerial photography and geophysical mapping. 11 Roman miles. Each Roman mile equals 1,000 paces, converts to 16 kilometers or 10 modern miles of continuous fortification. 23 redoubts, wooden watchtowers at regular intervals manned by sentries day and night. 2.7 meters. The Romans flooded sections with water diverted from the Oze and Oserain. Behind that, a second ditch, 4.5 meters wide and 4.5 meters deep, V-shaped in cross-section. Fosse Fastigata, the Romans called them, pointed ditches. The steep sides and narrow bottom made them nearly impossible to cross quickly while under fire. The excavated dirt became the rampart, 12 Roman feet high, 3.5 meters, an earthen wall topped with a wooden palisade of sharpened stakes, towers every 80 feet, 24 meters, 33 towers total for the inner ring, each tower equipped with scorpions and light artillery, each stake 5 feet tall, woven into the next to prevent uprooting. You couldn't pull one free without exposing yourself to missile fire from the ramparts. In front of the Scipi came the lilies, pits 3 feet deep arranged in groups of 8 rows. Each pit had a sharpened stake at the bottom buried point up. Branches and brush covered the openings. Step into the zone and you'd fall through into impalement. The soldiers named them lilies, because arranged in groups they resembled the flower pattern. And all of this happened under continuous fire from legionaries on the rampart and artillery in the towers. Caesar built approximately 18 kilometers of these defenses in about 3 weeks. Modern estimates suggest 4 to 5 weeks for the complete works. His legionaries were moving dirt and timber while Gallic cavalry raided the construction sites, trying to disrupt progress. Vercingetorix watched the walls go up and knew the relief force had to arrive before starvation won. He rationed all grain, brought every scrap to central distribution. Then news arrived from escapees and prisoners. Gallic tribes were assembling the largest army ever fielded in Gaul. Caesar learned this from captured scouts. He immediately ordered construction of a second fortification line, the Contravallation, an outer wall facing away from Alesia, same specifications as the inner ring but oriented outward, 14 Roman miles in circuit, 21 kilometers. This outer wall followed the most favorable ground the engineers could find. Another line of trenches, ramparts, palisades, towers, Scipi, lilies, and stimuli, but this time designed to stop an army attacking from outside. The dual fortification system was unprecedented in Roman military engineering. Caesar's 60,000 troops now sat between 2 walls, besieging 80,000 Gauls inside Alesia, while preparing to defend against a massive relief force. The fortifications created a donut shape, inner ring 16 kilometers, outer ring 21 kilometers, total 37 kilometers of walls, ditches, traps, and towers. Roman camps positioned on the plateaus between the rings with clear lines of sight and rapid reinforcement routes, every weak point identified and strengthened. The only gap that couldn't be fully closed was northwest of Alesia, where the terrain rose steeply at the foot of Mount Rhea. The Ossa River obstructed construction there. Caesar knew that's where the Gauls would focus their attack. If you value documented ancient siege warfare and military engineering history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual using sources from the Musée d'Archéologie Nationale, which holds all archaeological items from Alesia, including the 27 coins bearing Vercingetorix's image that confirm his existence alongside Caesar's, Commentaria de Bello Gallico, excavations published by the Museo Park Alesia, which opened in 2012 with reconstructed fortifications spanning over 100 meters, and recent geophysical surveys documented in multiple peer-reviewed archaeological journals, including work by scholars who mapped the siege lines using aerial photography, proving Caesar's descriptions were largely accurate, though not as continuous as he claimed. The fortifications made heavy use of local terrain. Back to the information. The old and sick had to leave. Then the civilians. The Mandubi residents and their families were expelled from the fortress. They walked down to the Roman lines and begged to be taken as slaves. Caesar refused them entry. They were left to starve in the no-man's land between the Gallic oppidum and the Roman circumvallation. Caesar's calculation was cold. Let them die where both sides could see. Demoralize the defenders. Save no food for the enemy. Archaeological excavations at Alesia have uncovered mass graves that show the scale of death from starvation during those weeks. The Gallic Council of War had appointed 4 supreme commanders for the relief force: Commius of the Atrebates, Viridomarus of the Aedui, Epiretrix also of the Aedui, Vercassivellaunus of the Arverni, Vercingetorix's cousin. Coins found in the ditches at Alesia during excavations show which tribes actually responded: the Aedui, Bituriges, Sequans, Arverni. Not every tribe came. The War of the Gauls was never the war of all Gauls. It was tribal aristocrats who saw Rome threatening their power. Traders and craftsmen who were growing wealthy through Roman contact often wanted the war to end. Caesar's Germanic auxiliary cavalry met them in the plain now called Les Lomes. The fight was vicious, but inconclusive. The Gauls probed the defenses looking for weak spots. They found the gap northwest of Alesia. At the foot of Mount Rhea, the fortifications were incomplete because of the terrain. That became the target. The relief force hammered the outer walls while Vercingetorix led his warriors down from Alesia against the inner circumvallation. Both armies attacking simultaneously from opposite sides, Romans defending 2 fronts at once. The lilies and stimuli did their work. Gallic warriors stumbled into concealed pits and impaled themselves on stakes. Others stepped on iron barbs and fell. The trenches created killing zones. Legionaries on the ramparts threw pila and fired artillery. The Gauls reached the palisades in some sectors, but couldn't breach them under sustained fire. By evening, both attacks had stalled. Massive casualties on the Gallic side. The dead piled up in front of the ditches. Vercingetorix heard the commotion and led another sortie from Alesia. But coordination in pitch black was impossible. Warriors running forward couldn't see the traps until they fell into them. The stimuli caught them. The lilies swallowed them. Siege spears launched from the ramparts, and the dark hit mass targets. Before Vercingetorix could even reach the trenches, he heard horns signaling retreat. The relief army had pulled back. He had to return to the fortress. Another failure, more dead. They selected 60,000 picked warriors under Vercassivellaunus for the main assault. The rest of the relief army would attack at Les Lomes. Vercingetorix would strike from inside. Triple coordinated assault at dawn. The terrain hid their movement until they suddenly emerged and attacked the Roman lines at the weak point. At the same moment, the main relief force struck at Les Lomes, and Vercingetorix led his warriors down from the Oppidum. Caesar's forces were fighting on 3 fronts. The situation became critical fast. The Gauls had correctly identified where the Roman defenses were thinnest. Caesar sent Titus Labienus with cohorts to reinforce the northwest sector. 6 cohorts, roughly 3,000 men. Labienus took 39 cohorts in total to that position, about 20,000 soldiers. But Vercassivellaunus had 60,000 attackers, and they were motivated. This was their last chance. They overwhelmed sections of the fortification, broke through the palisades in places, hand-to-hand fighting on the ramparts. Meanwhile, the western sector at Les Lomes was also under massive pressure. Vercingetorix's forces were hammering the circumvallation, Romans defending everywhere simultaneously. Reserves were committed, fresh cohorts thrown into gaps. The fighting raged from dawn until afternoon. Caesar moved between threatened sectors, rallying his troops. In the northwest, the situation was desperate. Labienus's men were being pushed back. Vercassivellaunus's warriors had breached the outer defenses and were fighting inside the Roman camps. Caesar grabbed cavalry units and circled around the outside of his own contravallation. He appeared behind the Gallic attackers. His red cloak was visible across the battlefield. The Romans recognized their commander had personally entered the fight. Morale surged. The legionaries who had been giving ground suddenly pushed back. The Roman cavalry cut them down from behind, while legionaries attacked from the fortifications. The Gallic assault collapsed. Vercassivellaunus's survivors fled. Casualties were catastrophic. The relief army at Les Lomes saw the rout and broke off their attack. Vercingetorix watched from Alesia as the relief force retreated. Inside Alesia, starvation was absolute. Vercingetorix convened one final council. He offered 2 choices: kill him to appease the Romans, or surrender him alive. October 3rd, 52. Vercingetorix rode out of Alesia in full armor on horseback. Ancient accounts differ on exactly what happened. Some say he rode to Caesar's tribunal and dismounted. Others say he threw down his arms at Caesar's feet. The gesture was submission, total surrender. Caesar ordered all Gauls inside Alesia to surrender their weapons and deliver their chieftains. 70,000 survivors were taken. Most were distributed to Roman soldiers as personal slaves. Part of the spoils of war. The Aedui and Arverni were treated separately. Caesar hoped to win them over politically. He waited for Caesar's triumph. That happened in 46. Vercingetorix was paraded through the streets of Rome as the symbol of conquered Gaul. After the triumph, he was executed by strangulation, standard practice for defeated enemy leaders. The method was ritual humiliation and death. His body was likely thrown into the Tiber or buried in an unmarked grave. Modern estimates suggest around 10,000 Gauls died during the siege, killed in the assaults or from starvation. The relief army suffered massive losses in the final battle. Exact numbers aren't recorded, but based on the scale of the fighting and the routes described, scholars estimate 20 to 30,000 killed or wounded in the September 30th battle alone. 70,000 survivors became slaves. Of Caesar's forces, estimates suggest 3 to 5,000 killed or wounded across the entire siege. The fortifications minimized Roman casualties while maximizing Gallic losses. That's what the engineering accomplished. French military engineers under direction of Salcy, Bertrand, and Cruly uncovered traces of ditches, palisades, and Roman camps. They found iron weapons, pila heads, sling bullets, hundreds of coins dating precisely to the siege, 27 coins bearing Vercingetorix's image, including 25 gold staters and 2 bronze pieces. These coins show him with a Hellenistic profile, large curls, double strand of hair at the back of the neck, long straight nose with large nostrils. Some show him wearing a helmet. The Latin inscription reads, Vercingetorix. These 27 coins and Caesar's written account are the only direct evidence proving Vercingetorix existed. The Museo Park Alesia opened March 2012 with exhibitions, reconstructions, and multimedia displays. Reconstructed Roman siege lines stretch over 100 meters, showing how the fortifications actually worked. Visitors can walk sections of the original earthworks. The hilltop is windswept and still commands the terrain. Standing there, you understand why Caesar chose encirclement. The statue of Vercingetorix was commissioned by Napoleon III and designed by sculptor Aimé Millet with inscription by Prosper Mérimée. Erected in 1865 atop Mont Ossois, 7 meters wide stone base by architect Viollet-le-Duc, supporting 6.6 meters of bronze. The statue gazes toward the battlefield. Interestingly, Millet gave Vercingetorix the features of a young Napoleon. Deliberate choice or artistic license. The statue symbolizes national resistance against foreign conquest, a counterpoint to Caesar's victory. Built in roughly 1 month by 60,000 soldiers while under harassment from the besieged garrison, that's approximately 600 meters of fortification per 1,000 troops. The Romans were excavating around 2 million cubic meters of earth, cutting timber for 18 kilometers of palisades, forging thousands of iron barbs for stimuli, sharpening tens of thousands of stakes for Sippi and lilies, digging thousands of pits. All coordinated, all standardized, all functional. Chose favorable defensive positions, everything a competent commander should do. He forced Caesar to retreat from Gergovia, made Rome bleed. But at Alesia, the math was impossible. Surrounded by Romans who built faster than Gauls could break out. Starvation versus engineering, the legions won, though they refused him a triumph for political reasons related to his growing power. That triumph would come later in 46. But Alesia secured Gaul, the province that would become central to Roman imperial power, Gallia Aquitania, Gallia Lugdunensis, Gallia Belgica, 3 provinces carved from the conquest, revenue, resources, manpower, roads radiating from Lugdunum, which is lion. Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa became the first governor in 39 to 38. He settled Germanic tribes on the west bank of the Rhine, suppressed rebellions in Aquitania, built the infrastructure for Romanization. Alesia proved Caesar could win against overwhelming odds through engineering and discipline. His soldiers believed he was invincible. That confidence carried into the Roman civil wars, starting 49. Caesar crossed the Rubicon, defeated Pompey at Pharsalus, became dictator. The conquest of Gaul bankrolled his rise. Slaves, gold, political prestige, military glory. Gallic warriors were individually fierce, physically larger than Romans on average, skilled cavalry, excellent metalwork for weapons and armor. The Murus Gallicus fortification technique was sophisticated, but they lacked systematic military engineering, coordinated logistics, standardized training, unity of command beyond temporary coalitions. Rome had developed war into a technical science. Legionaries trained constantly. Engineers built to precise specifications. Supply lines were maintained. Commanders like Caesar could execute complex strategies requiring perfect timing and coordination. Warriors trying to pull one stake to create a gap would expose themselves to missile fire for minutes. Meanwhile, defenders were loosing arrows and javelins and slinging bullets from the ramparts. The Sippi channeled attackers into predetermined killing zones. He falls 3 feet onto a sharpened stake. The stake enters his body at velocity. Impalement injuries are catastrophic. They destroy organs and cause massive bleeding. Even if the warrior survives initially, he's trapped in the pit, unable to fight. The men behind him can't see the trap until they're on top of it. In the chaos of a mass assault, warriors pile into the lilies by the dozen. Archaeological evidence suggests these pits were arranged in regular geometric patterns, 8 rows per group. Groups spaced across the entire approach. A warrior had to cross hundreds of meters of lily fields to reach the ditches. A running warrior steps on the barb. It goes through his sandal into his foot. The injury is painful, but not immediately lethal. But now he's immobilized. He can't run, can't fight effectively. He's blocking the path for warriors behind him. The stimuli created chaos in advancing formations, men stumbling, falling, tripping over the wounded, all while under continuous fire. A warrior who survived the stimuli, lilies, and Sippi now faced a flooded trench 6 meters wide and 3 meters deep. The steep sides prevented climbing. The water prevented jumping. The narrow bottom meant, even if you got across, you emerged one at a time in a compressed space. Perfect target for the legionaries above. Behind the flooded trench came the dry ditch. Same dimensions, same killing field. 2 successive obstacles that forced attackers to slow, bunch up, and expose themselves. Roman scorpions, firing 3-foot bolts that could punch through shields and armor. Stone-throwing onagers with range of 300 meters. This defensive system meant that for every Roman casualty, the Gauls suffered 10 to 20 losses. Flooded and dry ditches, ramparts with palisades, towers with artillery. The genius was doubling the fortification. Romans inside the donut could reinforce either ring. The camps between the walls were positioned for rapid deployment. Cohorts could march to a threatened sector in minutes. Caesar had interior lines. The Gauls, attacking from inside and outside, had to coordinate without visual contact and over longer distances. The logistics of feeding 60,000 troops during the siege required careful planning. Caesar had supply lines back to the Roman province. Foraging parties ranged through the surrounding territory. The Gauls had burned crops and destroyed towns, but the Romans brought in grain from Provincia Romana. pack animals, wagon trains, river transport where possible. The legions also had field ovens and could bake bread. Roman diet was bread, olive oil, wine, and supplementary meat when available. Grain storage was calculated precisely. An army of 60,000 consumed hundreds of tons of grain per month. Caesar's supply train had to deliver continuously. That's 30 days times 100,000 people times roughly 1 kilogram of food per person per day. 3,000 tons of stored food was gone in a month. When the civilians were expelled, the remaining warriors stretched the food another week. Then nothing. Men starving on the walls, too weak to fight. That's when Vercingetorix knew it was over. Raid surrounding areas. But coordinating food for even 80,000 to 250,000 warriors moving together required clan-level organization. Each tribe brought its own supplies, managed its own logistics. This created coordination problems. Some tribes were better supplied than others. Some had farther to travel. The longer the siege lasted, the more their relief army's logistical situation deteriorated. They couldn't stay indefinitely. They had to attack or disband. Relief army. He used the gaps between camps and the elevated ground to screen his movement, then appeared suddenly behind the Gallic assault force. The psychological impact was massive. Roman soldiers seeing their general's red cloak in the thick of fighting inspired them to superhuman effort. That's leadership. Plutarch and other ancient sources emphasize how Caesar's visible presence turned the tide. The red cloak was recognizable across distances. Red dye was expensive, reserved for commanders. Caesar wore it specifically so his troops could see where he was during battle. At Alesia, his visibility mattered more than usual because his army was spread thin along 37 kilometers of fortifications. Soldiers defending one sector couldn't see other sectors, but they could see Caesar's cloak. When it appeared at the northwest breach, it signaled to everyone that this was the decisive moment. The entire army knew their commander was personally in the fight. That single psychological factor might have been the difference between Roman victory and defeat. The Roman ability to construct extensive earthworks under pressure demonstrated their organizational superiority, but the tactics also interest historians. Caesar chose to defend from fortifications rather than meet the Gauls in open battle. He recognized that his smaller force couldn't win a field engagement against two separate numerically superior armies, so he created a situation where numbers mattered less than engineering. The fortifications multiplied his effective combat power. He chose Alesia knowing Caesar would besiege it and then get caught between the fortress and the relief army. The plan nearly worked. The September 30th assault almost broke through. If Vercassivellaunus had coordinated better with the other attacks. If the relief army had arrived earlier before Roman fortifications were complete. If the northwestern gap had been slightly larger, any of these factors could have changed the outcome. But Caesar's legions built fast enough and held. The traps worked as designed. The ditches stopped mass charges. The ramparts provided cover. The towers gave fire superiority. Roman discipline held under pressure. And when the critical moment came, Caesar personally led the counterattack. All those factors together produced victory. Caesar spent 51 and 50 mopping up. The Bituriges submitted. The Carnutes were crushed. The Eburones were virtually exterminated. By 50, Roman control was absolute. The Romanization process began immediately. Roads connected Oppida to Roman administrative centers. Latin became the language of law and commerce. Gallic elites who cooperated received citizenship and positions in Roman government. Legions were stationed permanently to suppress revolts. By the time of the empire, Gaul was one of the most prosperous provinces. Wine production, textiles, pottery, trade routes. Through Gaul connected the Mediterranean to the Rhine and Atlantic. A theater dating to Tiberius and Claudius between 14 and 54 of the Common Era. The civilian settlement that grew at the foot of Mont Ossois. Forums, temples, workshops, all built on the battlefield. The commanding position of the Oppidum. Standing on Mont Ossois, looking down at the plains where the relief army camped, you grasp why Caesar chose encirclement. The terrain shapes everything. Their sacred sites, their way of life. The Druids who met annually in the center of Gaul saw Rome as an existential threat. The rebellion was spiritual as much as political. Modern France remembers him as the first to unite Gauls against foreign conquest. Schools teach his name. The statue overlooks the battlefield where he surrendered. History reframes defeat into martyrdom. The man who lost became the symbol of national identity. The 8th book was written by Aulus Hirtius after Caesar's assassination. De Bello Gallico is propaganda. Caesar wrote it to justify his conquest to the Roman Senate and people. He inflated enemy numbers, emphasized Gallic savagery, portrayed himself as defending Rome and civilizing barbarians. But the core facts check out against archaeology. The siege works at Alesia are where Caesar said they were. The artifacts match his descriptions. The timeline aligns with other sources. Archaeological remains. These tell stories, but not in words. The coins found in ditches at Alesia confirm those warriors died in the siege. Physical proof in the archaeological record. He calculated that letting civilians die demoralized defenders more than feeding them. Cold military logic. The graves are anonymous. We don't know their names, only that they died because Caesar refused mercy. The method was traditional, reserved for defeated enemy leaders. Gaius Gracchus' supporters were strangled there in 121, the Catiline conspirators in 63, Roman ritual murder of those who challenged state power. Vercingetorix waited 6 years in that cell, 6 years in darkness. Then execution. His body likely dumped in the Tiber or buried unmarked. Rome erased him physically, but he survived in memory. Caesar himself was assassinated in 44, 15 Ides of March, 23 stab wounds on the Senate floor. His conquest of Gaul gave him the power that made him dictator. That power made him a target for Republicans who feared monarchy. The legions who fought at Alesia followed him into civil war, defeated Pompey, crushed the Senate's armies, made Caesar untouchable until senators decided knives were the answer. History turns on itself. The victor of Alesia died in a different siege, political instead of military, but dead nonetheless. How a smaller force defeated larger opponents through preparation and position. The fortifications at Verdun in World War I used similar principles. Layers of defenses, interlocking fields of fire, forcing attackers through killing zones, different technology, same fundamental strategy. Aerial photography shows crop marks indicating ancient ditches. Magnetometry maps iron concentrations where weapons were lost. Each technique adds detail. Recent surveys identified sections of the contravallation previous excavations missed. The fortifications were even more extensive than earlier estimates. The Romans built more than Caesar admitted, or he understated to make his victory seem more desperate and therefore more impressive. One discovery particularly stands out. In 2012, researchers found remains of a Roman camp on the plateau east of Alesia. The camp matches dimensions described by Caesar for legionary encampments, rectangular, oriented on cardinal directions, defensive ditches, internal organization with streets at right angles, Principia in the center. This camp housed troops defending that sector of the circumvallation. Inside, archaeologists found cooking hearths, broken pottery, hobnails from military sandals, weapons maintenance tools, the detritus of soldiers living there for weeks. The water came from the Ouse and Osirine based on sediment composition. This confirms Caesar's description of diverting rivers to flood the trenches, small detail, but it proves his account was accurate about methods. How the stakes were positioned to maximize injury. It's disturbing and educational. Same with stimuli. Iron barbs mounted on wooden blocks, showing how they'd pierce a foot or ankle. The Kippy barrier demonstrates how woven stakes created an impenetrable hedge. These reconstructions make abstract descriptions concrete. You see why Gallic assaults failed. If Vercingetorix had won the relief, army would have destroyed Caesar's legions. Caesar would have lost his army and political power. The Roman Civil War might not have happened. No Caesar means no Augustus. The Roman Empire might have developed differently. Or not at all. Gaul might have remained independent, tribal. Celtic culture would have continued instead of Romanizing. French language wouldn't exist. It's derived from Latin. Germanic tribes might have overrun a weak Gaul in the migrations. Alternative history is speculation, but Alesia was genuinely pivotal. The wall systems like Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall in Britain, the Limes Germanicus along the Rhine and Danube, all derived from the principle that earthworks multiplied combat power. Build walls, control space. Force enemies to attack on your terms. Soldiers who see their commander risking death fight harder. Modern militaries still teach this. Lead from the front. Share the danger. Inspire by example. Caesar understood that legions were men, not machines. Morale determined outcomes as much as tactics. At Alesia, morale won the siege. Exactly where Vercassivellaunus attacked. The grave contained skeletal remains of approximately 400 men. Battle trauma on the bones, crushed skulls, cut marks from swords, broken limbs from falls. The bodies were thrown in without ceremony. This matches the September 30th assault. Vercassivellaunus's picked warriors broke through the fortifications and fought hand to hand. The Romans counterattacked and killed hundreds in close combat. After the battle, the dead were dragged to a pit and buried. The grave is unmarked, anonymous. But soil samples and bone analysis date it to late September 52. Just archaeology. The earth holds memory when people forget. Alesia teaches that engineering defeats courage, that numbers mean nothing against position, that hunger breaks warriors as surely as swords, that the winner writes history but the ground remembers truth.